Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Strategies for Managing Invasive Plants. We're just going to give everyone a couple minutes here to join the broadcast, and then we will get started. So thanks for spending your evening with us. Lots of people joining the broadcast, so we'll get started in just a moment. Go ahead and get started here. So good evening to everyone. Welcome to Strategies for Managing Invasive Plants. My name is Kelly. I am Milwaukee Public Library's Adult Programming Coordinator. Tonight, we are so pleased and excited to welcome Linda Myers, nationally known gardening expert, TV and radio host, author, and columnist. Melinda has over 30 years of horticulture experience and has written over 20 gardening books. And along with Melinda, we are also really excited to welcome Liz Tanner and Jeannie Scherer from Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. And this workshop is sponsored by University of Wisconsin-Madison Extension Aquatic Invasive Species Outreach. So tonight, after our featured presentation, we will have time for audience Q&A. So please drop those questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You also can chat with each other in the chat box as well. And your microphones, you'll probably notice, are muted. So if you have any questions, feel free to use that Q&A function in the chat box. I will post a link to Melinda's handout in the chat box as well, periodically throughout the evening, so you'll be able to access that. And this webinar is being recorded, so we'll send that out in a couple of days along with the handout and any follow-up information that we have from tonight's presentation. So without further ado, I am very pleased to hand it over to Melinda. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And I want to thank Jeannie and Liz for joining me. They're going to pop in if I miss something. So please interrupt you two as needed. And they'll also be helping answer the questions. This is the area they are great experts. As Kelly mentioned, our webinar is being sponsored by UW-Madison Extension Natural Resources Institute Aquatic Invasive Species Program. That's where Jeannie is housed for at least through the end of April. And so her focus has been on aquatic invasive plants, sorry. And Liz Tanner is with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. And again, thanks to Kelly for hosting this webinar. And so you saw their lovely faces before. They are going to chime in with a Q&A and help me get through and answer questions because this is their area of expertise. As I mentioned, Jeannie is with UW-Madison Extension with her focus on aquatic invasive species, doing things like purple loosestrife, biocontrol, helping educate and inspire people to do the right thing, whether it's boating, recreation, aquatic plants and water features, or gardening. And Liz Tanner deals with organisms in trade. So as you can see, not just plants, but also animals as well. So she helps monitor what's coming into the state and managing those issues. So you two, I hope I represented you well. So I'm not going to talk about why manage invasive plants because you wouldn't be here if you didn't know why it was important. But I wanted to make sure we are all using the same definition because you often see invasive plant used, I would say, incorrectly or applied to plants that maybe it's not quite relevant. So I want to make sure we are all on the same page. This definition is from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, and they're really considering invasive plants that aren't native, so non-native plants, things that have left the boundaries of your garden and landscape, invaded nearby natural spaces or ditches or areas that aren't being managed and are reproducing without us getting involved. And the reason this is an issue, as you all know, is it disrupts the natural habitat. So it crowds out native plants that wildlife, beneficial insects, songbirds depend upon. It can disrupt the water hydrology, creating masses of plants and interfere with recreation as well as water flow, disrupt the soil so our plants can't grow as well. So there's a lot of things, and that's in the handout. I thought in case you need to convince someone else, whether you share your landscape with them or someone else that you see could use some advice on managing invasive plants. What isn't an invasive plant? Weeds. I often see aggressive plants or weeds called invasive, but weeds are just plants out of place. It's maybe a dandelion. It could be that daisy you planted, but it reseeded into an area you didn't want it. So it's growing where you don't want it. Aggressive plants are like this gooseneck loosestrife. It's the bully in the garden. These are the ones that crowd out. I think there's a evening primrose. It's crowding out. Evening primrose are pretty aggressive too. So it's the plant that takes over the garden, but doesn't really leave the confines of your landscape. And then noxious weeds are plants that have been determined, and it's different for every state and every province what's considered noxious, but they're plants that consider to be harmful to people, animals, and crops. And so they're being managed to prevent that harm from happening. So, important part is we're going to talk first about prevention, but doing your homework because it really comes down to you and me what we buy to put into our gardens. And in Wisconsin, there's the invasive rule NR40. And this is really a science-based document that looks at plants that pose a threat, dividing them into restricted and prohibited. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But it's a great list to refer to, and your state Department of Natural Resources, Nature Center, or Extension Service may also have lists of invasive plants. But it's good to look at this list when you're ordering plants, especially online or going to the garden center, because a lot of times there are invasive plants that are restricted in our area that you could buy for sale. So what does this mean? Prohibited. There's a ban on bringing them into the state, selling them into the state, sharing them, and owning them. These are things that are prohibited. This is porcelainberry. I grew up in Ohio, and I remember on the campus at Ohio State, there was a beautiful planting of them. And it's a gorgeous plant, but boy, it's invasive. And so it has not shown up here, or there are very few plantings. So things that are rare or are not yet present in the state are prohibited. So not only can't they be sold or added, but you can't hang on to them because the reason is we have the opportunity to get rid of them because they're either not here or there are very few of them. So we don't want more coming in, and we want to take care of any, if there are any, that are in the state. So those are listed as prohibited. Restricted plants, and hopefully you don't have this growing in your yard. If you do, you know why this is a problem. This is not only aggressive in the landscape, it has escaped and invaded our woodlands. Bishop's goutweed, like other restricted plants, are already established in the state. So the idea of eliminating them totally from the state really isn't practical, but we don't want to have more coming in. And so, just like the prohibited, they're banned on transport, transfer, and introduction. But you don't have to go out and eliminate those. You may want to, but it's not part of the rule. Now, moneywort is a ground cover, very aggressive. The green variety is restricted. The yellow leaf varieties are not. And that's where it's helpful to look at your local state ordinances, or in Wisconsin, the NR40 rule, so you know what's allowed and what is not. Um, Always check your local Department of Natural Resources. I always go to the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources website. And there are links to all these resources I talk about in the handout to make it easy for you to check. So when you go to this page and you do a search, you can enter the plant name, and I find that's the easiest way. There are lists of plants that are invasive as well. So this is a great way for you to not only find out, can I buy this? Is it a problem? But how to identify it and control. So there's lots of useful information on that website. I'm lucky enough to do work with gardeners across the country, and some of you join me from Canada. And I always look at the Invasive Plant Atlas website because it shows you, talks about what plants are invasive, but also has maps that show where they're a problem. And then you can do a little further research if you're not sure. Or maybe you see, you know what, it's not listed as invasive in my state, but it is in an adjoining state with very similar climate and soil that maybe I don't want to add it because it may become deemed invasive in the near future or a problem for me to deal with. So avoidance is the first step, right? Why bring in problems? We probably, there are things, I used to recommend, and my apologies, things that I planted that now I'm busy getting rid of because we didn't know at the time. I always say if it's low maintenance, easy care, or long blooming, and it seems too good to be true, it probably is. So do your research. So, avoidance, besides doing your homework, only purchase from reputable sources. Just because you can buy it online doesn't mean it can be grown or can be used in gardens in your state. The good companies, when I go online looking at plants at catalogs and retailers that I know, when I look at them and they'll say, can't be sold in this state, can't be sold in that state. And so they know they're familiar with the rules and the regulations in all the places they sell. But there are some sources online that aren't aware there's a problem, don't care that there's a problem, or don't stay up to date, sell it, ship it, and then you end up with an invasive plant that you've got to deal with getting rid of. Shop locally whenever possible. This is a retailer that allowed us to do some shooting for the videos I did with DNR and the extension service. And they were very frustrated because they follow the rules and regulations. They're monitored. Shops like this, where you could go in and buy at a garden center or a retail outlet in your area, they're being monitored by the Department of Ag Trade and Consumer Protection in Wisconsin, the DNR. And so they know the rules and they abide by them. But, they've had customers come in and say, oh, well, I really wanted that plant and you don't sell it. So I ordered it online and had it shipped to me. So we're doing them a disservice for following the rules. And then that person's going to end up with a problem. Sometimes we don't know where those invasive plants or think about it. What about those swags that you hang on the front door? In the fall, you might have a lot of bittersweet. Oriental bittersweet is often used in those decorations, or maybe teasel or phragmites. And the seeds from that decoration spread not only into your landscape, but could be spread in nearby natural spaces. Jeannie shared with me one time she saw a TikTok that said, go out and grab that Phragmites to make your wedding arrangements and save money, and that teasel will do just fine. Well, the problem is, yeah, they're free and they're out there, but you'll have it in your landscape and you're adding to the problem. So you want to make sure that you are not unintentionally creating more work for you and harming the nearby natural spaces. Grow healthy plants. And as gardeners, right plant, right place, right care. Healthy plants are better able to outcompete invasive plants. And then growing native species whenever possible is also a good thing. Okay, hopefully this isn't what you're looking at, but if you've got existing plants, you're going to need to deal with these, right? And that's probably why you're here. So I was watching a webinar given by Mark Runtz, who's another University of Wisconsin employee, and he was talking about buckthorn. And these were 5 steps that actually Jeannie, Liz, and I have talked about, but he put it kind of in my face, and I thought I would share that with you, kind of giving you step 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and really clearly defining it. And I think this helps kind of organize how you want to approach dealing with these infestations. First, identify the plants. You got to know what's in there, what you need to manage. Is it a problem? Map out the problem area. And I added this one. I think note what's nearby. If your neighbor has this burning bush on the lot line growing, the invasive one, the species, chances are it's going to be continuing to invade yours. Or if you're managing the buckthorn on your property, maybe you can enlist your neighbor to do the same, to do that so that you all both benefit by managing the problem at the same time. Do your research. And we talked about a few resources, and there are more coming up that will really help you decide what kind of control options are available. Talks about many of them have good identification information, control methods that include timing, mechanical, biological, chemical, whatever, and doing your research. What are your options? Then decide on what controls to use. And you may be using a couple at the same time. You may be deciding that, these two methods will work or these three methods will work, and give you better results than just trying one thing. Just like any problem, whether it's insect disease or even selecting plants, evaluating your success. Were those control methods working? Are you managing the problem? And if not, how do you adapt? Look for some other alternatives. And it never hurts to take notes, whether with your camera, on your computer, just jotting down what seems to be working and what isn't. So together, we've teamed up, the three of us, to produce several different videos to help with identification. This isn't all of them, but just giving you some of the more common ones. Uh, 8 aquatic invasive species that are in Wisconsin and much of the Great Lakes, giving you some ID clues and some visuals, top invasive plants to avoid, and then identifying terrestrial invasive plants. Besides clicking on the QR code to download the link and make the connection, I've also put the links in the handout. I mentioned attending Mark Wren's webinar on managing buckthorn. As I mentioned, he's part of the University of Wisconsin-Madison as well, and he's put together quite a few invasive plant management fact sheets. And you could see he's got a list going through here. And then here's just one of the examples. So he's got pictures to help you with identification, talks about the problem, what it causes, and gives you some additional control. So this, along with your local Department of Natural Resources and some others, I think will help you with the ID and start making those control strategies. One of the other resources I really like a lot is the Wisconsin Invasive Species Calendar. And the reason I like it is if you've got things in the landscape, sometimes it can be overwhelming and sometimes it's easy to miss. And so knowing when to watch for the leaves coming up, the flowers appearing, it can help you find them and identify them. I also use I use the Plant ID app on my iPhone. And I know a lot of people use iNature, Picture This. What I like to do is I'll take a picture of the problem if I'm not sure, and then check and see what the ID comes up, and then I truth it, because sometimes they're not quite spot on, but at least it gives you a place to start, and this gives you a time frame to when to look for the problem plants. I just picked a couple of plants that I often get questioned on that I see are misidentified. And I thought I'd start with Dame's Rocket. Some people think it's woodland phlox because it often appears on the edge of the woodland, but this is a member of the mustard family. Note it only has 4 petals, where the woodland phlox on the right has 5. Dame's Rocket was included in wildflower mixes and some even native plant mixes. And so people were adding them thinking they were doing the right thing. The flowers are fragrant, they're prolific seeders, and so they quickly move in woodland edges. You see them in the spring blooming into early summer. So one to be aware of and to manage. Bittersweet, and this one can be a little tricky. So on the left is Oriental bittersweet, the one we don't want to grow. Notice the leaves are a little more rounded than the American bittersweet on the right. Take a look at where the fruit occur. The fruit on Oriental bittersweet happen all along the stem and out of the leaf axils. When you look at the American bittersweet, all the fruit is at the tip of the branches. So that's another way of identifying the difference. With bittersweet, you need 1 male for every 1 to 5 females to pollinate and get fruit. And there is an autumn revolution American bittersweet that's self-fertile. So just kind of keeping an eye on it. You may have some male plants in there, but definitely want to manage those with the fruit. One of my favorite spring bloomers, and if you have a damp, moist spot, boy, marsh marigold on the right is the one to choose. It usually has 5 petals on the flower. It may have more, up to 9, but usually around 5. On the left is lesser celandine. It can take over, crowd out, and it looks very similar, right? But it usually has about 8 petals, maybe up to 12. So you can see they tend to be narrow, more of them as well. So the one on the left, the lesser celandine, is the one we don't want. So we have the marsh marigold to keep. Okay, so we have problems. Well, how are we going to manage these problems? The first thing I want you to do is dress for the job. And this is even if you're not using chemicals. But if you're going out in the woods, there's ticks, right? There's mosquitoes. You may be allergic to some of the plants. And even though it's hot, long sleeves, long pants, tuck your pants into your socks to reduce the risk of ticks, because the last thing you want to do is end up with a different problem. And if you are using chemicals, you definitely want to read the safety guidelines on the label, which tell you what kind of protective gear you need. So be prepared because you're going out. And I wear safety glasses. I've been wearing them in my garden because I find I'm splashing dirt in my eyes, but getting a stick in the eye when you're pruning out something or digging out something, not good. So safety glasses and even a little sun protection. So we're going to look for ways to contain the spread. So first we're avoiding it. We've got the problem. How can we manage? And if you look at some of the invasion of infested areas, you may be overwhelmed and turn around and go back in the house. So maybe if you can just contain the spread is a good place to start. And as a gardener, that we deadhead plants to prevent reseeding on those things that seed readily. So cutting back plants before they set seed is one way, at least to prevent the reseeding. You're not eliminating the plant, but what you are doing is preventing the seeds from landing in and making it even worse. So a couple of options, Dame's Rocket. Now, Dame's Rocket starts blooming in the spring, but it blooms for a long period of time. And so you'll have problems with reseeding as well. And so you want to make sure that when you're cutting it back, you're bagging it up right away if there are any seed pods present. Best to prune it, to cut off those flowers before they start setting seed. Works great on smaller populations. And again, it's about not letting it reseed. Woodland forget-me-nots, cut those back as well. That's another one. Don't let them seed. You won't eliminate the problem, but you'll reduce that risk of them spreading from seed around the area. Purple loosestrife flowers from the bottom up. And this is one you want to definitely, all of them, make sure if there are any seeds. I was reading an article that talked about when you cut them back, it might even want to bend it into the bag and cut it back. So if there are seeds, then they go into the bag. And I thought, well, that's not a bad idea for any of these. If you can cut over the bag on the taller plants like this and Dame's Rocket, then you're sure to get not only the flowers that may continue to develop into seeds, but also the seeds. Garlic mustard. Oh, I've got that in my yard too. I'm trying to manage. So garlic mustard, it's a biennial, and that means the first year you get that rosette of leaves, and they're low growing, and you probably see those in the fall. The next year, the plant stretches and flowers, sets thousands of seeds, and then the parent plant dies back. So what we want to do with garlic mustard is when that flower stalk starts expanding, cut it back to the ground. Get it before the flowers open whenever possible. Now you'll want to go back and check again because it may, if it has enough stored energy, it might send up another sprout. But cutting it back, bagging that is important. The first year I went on a garlic dig, this was like 40 years ago, they just said cut it back and leave it in place. We didn't know any better. What we found out is those flowers continued to develop and it developed seeds. So we left all the seed right where we cut the garlic mustard. We know better now. And Japanese knotweed, if you're battling this, I have seen Small city lots taken over with this. Look at the woodland here along the shoreline. There are links to all these invasive plants, direct links on your handout. Now, repeatedly cutting back can work on small populations, but you need to make sure you cut all of them back because this does send out, it has rhizomes, so you get shoots coming all over. And if any of them survive, they're feeding the rest of the plant. So if you can have a small infestation and keep after it, you may be able to manage it totally, but definitely cutting it back before it sets seed at least will prevent reseeding. It won't prevent the rhizomes from spreading, but you remove one source of new plants. Yellow flag iris, we can see it growing in a garden along water edges. It spreads by pieces of the rhizome mat break off and float down the river. The seeds drop and float down the river. And so removing the seed pods and getting rid of them can help slow the spread in that manner. Even with woody plants, cutting back can help to some degree slow the spread. And at that webinar I was watching, they were talking about they're seeing some positive results that you cut back the buckthorn, haul out the top, get rid of, you're still going to have some seeds. But the good news is they found those seeds usually only remain viable in the ground for a couple of years, unlike garlic mustard, where it remains viable for 7 or more years. And then what they were finding when it resprouts, cutting it back again, just continually cutting, or ripping off the little shoots that develop that are producing the energy to feed the plant. So, going through this could be a great young adult or, help get the kids out there ripping those side shoots off. And that's a way to starve the plant as well. And they're seeing some suppression, some control doing that. Dispose of the debris. I can't mention that enough. Cutting it down, but if we leave it in place, there could be seeds. Fragments of some of the plants can root and then start to grow again. And most municipalities allow you to throw invasive plant material in a clear plastic bag, label it invasive, and toss it in the trash. But check with your local municipality first. Most of us do not have hot compost piles. So if we throw this in our compost pile, chances are it won't kill the seeds, won't kill the rhizomes. And so when we add the compost back in the garden, we're adding the problem back in. Burning for some, but burning has negative environmental impact and is not allowed in many places. So check with your local municipality to see what's allowed. Timing and persistence, okay, those are the two important things. Once and done, unfortunately, is not going to work. And that's where I always look at the Department of Natural Resources or the Mark Wrens or the other resources from the Great Lakes area, since I'm in the Great Lakes. Check with your nature centers, your extension service, your Department of Natural Resources for those plants invasive in your area. So you know the timing, whether it's cutting back or digging out or treating with a pesticide, and then be persistent because you clear an area, you've cleared that space so those seedlings have better sunlight and more space to grow. Mowing. Mowing is another option. We're seeing bishop scoutweed again. I can't tell you how many people, how many gardeners I talk to that are trying to get rid of it. Well, mowing can work. So continually mowing for several years can help manage small infestations of bishop scoutweed, but you need to get them all. It's another plant that has rhizomes, as you know, and spreads out of the garden bed. Crown vetch. This one moved into some of my garden beds this year, so I hired my grandson to mow while I did some weeding. And mowing, you can either do it in late spring, twice a year, June and August. The main thing you want to do is make sure you mow it and it doesn't flower. I used some herbicide where I couldn't get the mower in or reach in to cut or dig out the plant. But mowing is helping me manage it. I had to sacrifice a few garden beds, but manage it without the use of chemicals. And then reed canary grass. Again, huge populations, you know, are going to be hard to manage. But if you catch it early, when they're emerging, that new grass appears, that's the time to mow reed canary. These are just a couple examples, but when you go into fact sheets or the DNR website, it gives you timing information. Smothering. One of Liz and my project, and John, who works with us, is to develop a webinar covering some of these management strategies. So next time I'll have a better video or visual for this. But the idea of smothering is just suffocating the plant. You've probably done this anyway for other problem areas in the garden. Now, I always mention if it's in a garden bed, you're going to want to edge that garden bed because you want to make sure that those plants you're trying to kill aren't getting any nutrients from any that may have escaped the garden. You want to make sure that you secure the tarp, no rips or tears, because it seems amazing they can find whatever little sunlight goes in and then they'll come out through the top. So we're using tarps, maybe old carpet, black landscape fabric, something that blocks the sunlight. It needs to be left in place for at least one growing season. Sometimes it's even two. Now, realize if you're covering a garden bed with this, you're going to kill your good guys too. And you may decide, you know what, it's worth the sacrifice. I'm just, you know what, I'm going to get rid of it all. I don't want to mess with it. Those plants, I'll just replace them. But maybe you have something special that you can't find that was an heirloom from the family. If you dig it out, pot it up. And I'd recommend leaving it in a container for a couple years. Grow it to make sure none of that invasive plant, none of the roots or rhizomes or any seeds are in there. Because if they are and they have a chance to sprout, you can manage them in that container. The last thing you want to do is dig that plant out, set it aside, get rid of the invasive plant, put that desirable plant in with the weeds, invasive plant seeds, and end up creating a problem. On your handout, I also have something on solarization, which cooks the soil and the plants. Again, it's using the power of the sun. Same kind of basic, it's really critical with solarization to anchor the edges because you need to trap that heat. Okay, physically removing. This is where we're going to up our efforts here and dig things out. And there are certain plants that are a little easier to get started with, and some you may need a little more muscle. So, small plants and small infestations, digging and disposal is possible. You want to get all of the roots, the rhizomes, all of the underground, as well as the above ground. And this is important to get these out also and all the debris because some parts of these plants can start new plants. Japanese knotweed's a perfect example. One little fragment of a rhizome can start a plant and you'll be dealing with a large infestation again. So make sure you're digging and removing and disposing of properly. Small saplings of woody plants. This is honeysuckle, and those berries are a favorite of the birds that like to eat them and spread them about. And so, honeysuckle, buckthorn, barberry. This is where gloves and a heavy jacket come in handy. And burning bush are good candidates when they're young. So small ones you could just dig out, but once they're about get a little bit bigger, you may want to use a spading fork or a weed wrench type tool. They used to sell weed wrenches. That brand is no longer available. I bought some extra gators I'm for using this coming year. But the weed wrench type tools, as you can kind of see here, you stick it in next to the plant, the clasp the stem, the long handle gives you leverage to pull it out. And so some of these I've seen pull out one, even up to 1.5 inch diameter plants, probably depending on how strong you are. Girdling. There's a link to let's see, it's a Great Lakes, woody plant, Great Lakes, invasive plants. Anyway, there's a link on your handout that talks about these next few strategies. It gives you more detail. But the idea of girdling, and you probably know if mice or voles have girdled your tree, they feed around the trunk, eat through the cambium, right? Prevent the water and nutrients from going to from the roots up to the tree and from the tree producing nutrients going down to the roots. This is the same kind of idea. So most plants, you need at least 6 inches high and then all the way around. You're stripping off the bark, cutting into the cambium, cutting through the cambium so they can't move the water and nutrients between the leaves and the roots. Now, this kills the top of the plant, but quite often, especially if there's enough stored energy resources in the roots, it will resprout. So this is definitely not a once and done, but it might at least stop the top growth so you could later come in and deal with it. So that's girdling. Maybe you're going to opt for chemicals. And so you want to make sure that you read and follow label directions carefully before purchasing and before applying. And this again is where you want to check with your local Department of Natural Resources, your extension service. DNR provides good information on the products that are effective at controlling the different invasive plants. If you are controlling aquatic invasive plants, you need a permit from the DNR and a certified applicator license. And it's about keeping our waterways safe. And so you want to make sure that you follow those as well. And again, I can't emphasize enough to read and follow all label directions. I've had people come back to me after they used a product, then they read the label. They used it improperly because they didn't read the label and either had damage they weren't expecting or put it on something they weren't sure when they could plant again or eat the produce. So read it first. It's very important for you to be safe and to be effective. So one way of using herbicides is to spray the leaves. And so those herbicides, by applying them to the leaves, Roundup is one such product. It's absorbed through the leaves and translocated. It's a systemic, translocated into the roots, so it kills the tops and the roots. But keep in mind, there's probably a lot of good desirable plants all around. And whether it's a total vegetation killer or a broadleaf weed killer, you want to make sure you're not killing the good guys, that you're trying to get rid of the invasive plants to allow them to thrive and kill them at the same time. So you may want to purchase a product that has a sprayer with a shield. So this really narrows the spray, so it allows you to really focus it right on the plant you want, but still keep in mind, often the good guys are growing nearby. I've also used pieces of cardboard or poster board, large plastic containers with access to spray over top, and um, and then just isolating it or protecting my good guys with that plastic milk jug with the bottom cut out or the other plastic thing or whatever, and then spraying the weeds, whichever way. But make sure you know how it's being absorbed. Is it just a foliar product that's absorbed through the leaf? Roundup, when it hits the soil, it's not absorbed by the roots. But some of the broadleaf weed killers recommended will kill the tops, but also when it hits the soil, it's there for the roots to absorb. Basal bark application. This works most effectively with less dense and smaller infestations, but one of the nice parts about this is you're applying that herbicide to a much smaller area. And so you're applying it down towards the base of the plant, as you can see this gentleman has done here, and they've got a dye so you know what plants you've treated, which I think is really important. It seems obvious when you start, but then after you're spraying for a while, did I treat this one or not? So a list of a few of the plants, buckthorn, multiflora rose, oriental bittersweet that this works on, but the plants need to be 6 inches in diameter or smaller to be truly effective. And if you're using this way, you're using an herbicide that will move through the plant. So unlike girdling, physically girdling, you're applying that herbicide and it's being absorbed and then it's moved through the plant to kill the top and the bottom. Basal bark application, I want to mention, can be done almost any time of the year. Spring, sometime a little less effective when the sap is flowing. Another herbicide treatment time that can be done any time of the year is the cut stump application. So I've listed some, and you've probably heard of this and maybe even done it before yourself. So this works quite well where you cut the plant back to the ground, just leaving a stump like you see here, haul out the top, and then treat that cut end with an herbicide. Again, using a dye marks that you've treated the area. You can see they concentrated that treatment where the xylem and phloem are, so it would be taken down to kill the roots. Herbicide injections. This was something new that I learned about a couple years ago. And the idea here, you can buy an injector that you inject into the trunk, and your goal is to get it into the vascular system. So then that herbicide is carried throughout the plant, killing the top and the bottom. The other is a hack and inject method where you take an axe and you chop in like you see they did here, and then paint the herbicide or brush it in. Again, making sure you treat that cambium area so that you're minimizing your herbicide treatment. And one of the things I really liked about this is I thought that really reduces my exposure as well as the exposure to the environment. So looking for methods for me that are important, and maybe for you, is minimizing our use. Herbicides may be the answer. I mean, sometimes that's what we need to do to intervene, but how can we apply them not only safely, but limit the exposure to the other plants? When I started working with Jeannie and Liz, and I'm spending way more time on the website, the DNR website. One of the things I was kind of perplexed by initially, but as I thought about it and read through the description, it makes total sense. My first thought is let's take care of the densest, worst part of the infection and work our way out. But really, the best option is to start with those outliers. You can exert less effort and stop the spread. So you're trying to prevent that core from getting bigger and denser and expanding. So we're moving in on that major part of the infestation. So we'll start with the outliers, but we're not, remember, once and done. So once we control those, we're going to continue to monitor. Then hopefully we've got that fairly under control, continually monitoring, move into the advancing front. And that, notice it's denser, more of the invasive plants. But again, it's getting closer to that core. And so we can manage those as well and continue to monitor both the outliers and any surrounding area, because those birds are carrying seeds. And then the last one we may decide to tackle is that core, because it's already greatly infested, and we do want to tackle it. And you may decide, I'm going to hire some help. There are arborists that will do invasive weed control on woody plants. And so, check and see if look for their recommendations online. Ask how they manage them. Ask them what products they use. See if it fits with your goals. But you may decide if that infestation is too intense and too big that you may want some help. And then you could focus on some of those other areas. I mentioned Jeannie does biocontrol or manage the biocontrol program for Wisconsin DNR, where they work with people to raise the insects, that then go and feed on the purple loosestrife. There is some research going on to see if there are disease organisms or other insects that will control and manage other invasive plant species. So there's work in that area that's continuing. I can't stress enough to continue to monitor. You feel like you put all this work in, aren't we done yet? But it's just like your garden, right? You weed it and you got to go back and weed it again. The same is true with invasive plants. All those seeds that were dropped on the ground are going to sprout. Again, if you girdle the bigger plants, they may be sending up suckers. And so you want to make sure that you're doing some control. And I wanted to mention some research that Mike Schuster had a webinar. It was part of the grounds maintenance by Waukesha County Extension, aimed at professionals, master gardeners, avid gardeners. But it's new research out of the University of Minnesota. And what he's looking at is, okay, we clear this area and we've opened it up. So now the buckthorn, the honeysuckle, mainly looking at buckthorn, has a free open range. They could sprout and regrow. And boy, that's an open area for more to resprout. So his research is looking at, okay, what if we clear this area and put grasses and sedges in to outcompete and to try to slow down revegetation of the invasive plant? Maybe we use a wildflower mix, something with grasses, sedges, and flowers to reseed the areas where we've removed the invasive plant, or native shrubs that will, again, crowd out. Now, the native shrubs and trees were effective, but you really have to plant plants or saplings, and they take a little longer to establish, and it can be pretty pricey. On the links that I put in your handout, he talks about the different mixes and the different plants and some amount of seed. And he's saying that grasses and wildflower mixes may not be as effective, but they're more affordable. And so he's seen some pretty good results at really suppressing the revegetation of the invasive plant. But it's not a forever thing. So you want to make sure you're getting those good plants started, which may mean you have to do some watering in a dry year, and get those established so they can outcompete the weed plants. So there's never enough time to talk about everything we want to talk about. And I teaming up with Liz and Jeannie, one of the nice things, it's allowed me to do other webinars, and I've kept them on my website. They're also available on, some of them are available on the Public Library YouTube channel if we had teamed up with the Public Library at the time. If you go to my website under Appearance, Live Events and Webinars, go to On Demand, and it'll give you a link either to the Milwaukee Public Library YouTube channel, or if it's housed on my site, the link there, and the handouts are there as well with lots of detailed information. Some relatively new publications. So alternatives for terrestrial landscape plants as well as wetland and aquatic plants. These are available online, so you could view them there and print them out. If you see me out and about, I usually have these to share, or if you see someone else with DNR, they probably will have those as well. So take advantage of them, just giving you alternatives. So once you get rid of the bad guys, or if you're like, well, I really like that buckthorn creates a nice screen. Well, how about chokeberry or native chokeberry that flowers, has fruit that eventually the birds eat in great fall color, much more ornamental than buckthorn. Thanks again to Jeannie and the folks at UW-Madison Extension, Natural Resources Institute Aquatic Invasive Species Program, and also Liz and her colleagues at the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources for sponsoring this webinar, and all the good things they do and teaming up with me have allowed me to do to reach out and share with you. And of course, Kelly, who I said by June, she's going to be really tired of seeing me, but Milwaukee Public Library has helped us reach even more people, not only in Milwaukee, but way beyond. And if you're beyond the limits of Wisconsin, hopefully we've given you some information that will help you in your state or province as well. I always end my talks by asking you to grow a garden or two, and you can see the mess behind. It was early in the season. My granddaughter is now 17, but she always said she wanted a job where she could carry a clipboard. And so she was doing her own little experimenting, and I'm hoping I can get her out in my woodland to help me identify those invasive species. But, inspire some youngster in your life. Look for the young family starting a garden down the road, or maybe a recent retiree that finally has time to garden. Work with your neighbors to share the information you have and experience about dealing with the gardens, growing beautiful gardens, but also dealing with invasive plants. I mentioned on my website, you can find these as well, and there are links on the handout. So it's time that we are all busy learning more to put new ideas to work in our garden. Once again, We Energies is sponsoring, and we've teamed up with the public libraries of Wisconsin and the UP of Michigan, but you are all invited to participate. I'm doing a monthly webinar from April through June, videos and activities, one per month, April, May, and June. The webinars will be recorded and they'll be posted on the Milwaukee Public Library YouTube channel, and the links will be available on my website as well. And there is a page on my website. You'll see this graphic. Click on that. It'll take you to links. Once they're done, I in the process of getting the videos started and the activities done and posted, but those will be available along with links to the webinars on that page as well. And please stay connected. If you have emailed me a question and I haven't answered, my apologies. I'm outnumbered, but I'm trying to catch up a bit. Email again, get on the top of that list. And if you do info@melindamyers.com, tell Diana you've emailed me before and she'll make sure you get at the top of the list. I'm going to ask Kelly and Jeannie and Liz to join me again. I tried to keep it somewhat contained for me, pretty good. And I maybe we should tackle the questions. And Jeannie and Liz, please chime in because I always value your input and your knowledge.
Everyone. So we're going to start with the questions that are in the Q&A. So if you haven't put your question in there, the box is at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Feel free to put that question in there and Melinda will answer that this evening. So our first question is from Liz. Liz says, there's a 5-acre woods next to my property and it's filled with invasive plants. They are starting to spread onto my property. They have not interest in taking care of the invasive plants. What can I do?
I'm going to start and then Liz and Jeannie, feel free to jump in. We did a webinar and it's still available on my website we reached out to master gardeners, avid gardeners, client partners of Liz and Jeannie on strategies for helping gardeners manage invasive plants. And we talked a little bit about, I know it's hard. People say, I want to keep the buckthorn. It's a screen. I don't have time to manage. I don't want to take care of it. Um, you may want to try sharing information about how it's degrading their woodland, the impact on their property. They may apparently don't care about it invading your property, but maybe helping them understand the problem on their property, that why it's important to them, maybe one. A lot of people don't understand the real damage that invasive plants cause. And that's one reason I included why manage them, because all of you do, but maybe those people you're trying to work with don't. And Jeannie and Liz, do you have any other suggestions on that? It's a tough one, isn't it?
I was just actually putting in the chat. I remember Kelly Kearns when she worked for DNR. She got this almost exact same question from somebody. I think she was on the Larry Mueller show at the time, and I was listening. And she said that maybe, and this could be for yourself, or if you're trying to convince a neighbor, to at least go after those female trees first to cut down the ones with the berries, since the male trees can't do a whole lot with that, they're not producing more berries for more baby trees. It's at least a good start, and you might be able to make some inroads with a neighbor. Could you just cut down these?
It is a tough one because, and you have to live next to them. So it's tough.
Yeah,
So good luck.
Yeah.
Oh,
there
go
was
ahead.
another question along those lines, from I already forgot her name, and she's way up there. She lives in Door County next to a land trust, and the
Oh.
same sort of problem. But I gave her the link to the Door County Invasive Species group, so that maybe they can provide some help. And Liz, maybe you can say something about the sismas that help with, especially the terrestrial species.
Yeah, you might be able to reach out to your local SISMA to see if they can provide help as well.
And what is
It
the
is
SISMA?
difficult. It is the Cooperative Invasive Species Management Areas, and I'll provide a link in the chat.
Okay.
And that's of course for those that are here in Wisconsin. But yeah, it does get challenging because especially if it's a restricted species, they're not required to remove it. So I think Melinda had some great points about how to just try to talk to them and reach them about why it is important to manage it, even if they're not required to.
Everyone. So Judy's asking, which option would work best at getting rid of wild parsnip?
I'm turning this over to you two. I'd have to pull up the DNR website to look at. And one is making sure you're covered because of the allergic reaction. That's my contribution. So
There are good pulling tools for parsnip. I've seen a lot of people recommend to get out there and do that. Be covered, to get the root out. I've also, a couple of folks have told me that the roots, they're a parsnip. They're really good, apparently, eating if you like parsnips. And Liz, maybe you'll remember. I'm not. If you're going to just try cutting it down. You want to make sure, like with other plants Melinda mentioned, you want to cut it before it sets seed. Because if you wait too long, you might still end up with some seeds. So it gets to a point where in the summer you can't pull certain things like Dame Rocket, garlic mustard, because the ground gets dry. And so that cutting can become your only option.
good point about the dry soil.
Yeah, you gotta cut before it sets seed. For large populations, you could use like a brush cutter. For chemical, you can spot treat with 2,4-D, but you'd want to do that mid-May to mid-June.
Thanks.
Everyone. The next question is from Lynn. Lynn's saying that she's struggling to get rid of creeping bellflower. Suggestions on how to get rid of it successfully.
Okay, well, it is a tough one. Smothering, I've seen work kind of sacrificing the garden bed and using a total vegetation killer. Um, again, if you remove your good plants, pot them up because the little rhizome, little fragments will persist, as you know. That is a really aggressive. It's not listed as invasive, I don't think, but it's a bully in the garden. And so doing solarization, edging the bed, clear plastic. I like to cut stuff down, cover it with a clear plastic edge, and then cook it. And that usually works pretty well. You may have to do it a couple times. And again, remove anything you want to keep or just say, I'm going to sacrifice it. Beautiful flower plant, but boy, it can take over. Yes. And I feel bad for you, Lynn, because that is a tough one.
It
Yeah,
is a restricted.
Oh, it
yeah,
is
I shook
restricted? Okay,
I
thank
shook
you.
my head no, and
Mhm.
then I realized I was glancing down at the question about creeping Charlie, and creeping
Okay.
Charlie is not restricted, but yeah,
Okay, thank you
bellflower
for,
is.
see, this is why I need these guys.
And I need Liz.
So I see in the chat, Karen is sharing a comment that there's a Facebook group called Creeping Bellflower Battles that offers a lot of
Ooh.
information on control techniques.
Oh, that's what I love about gardeners. Creeping bellflower battles. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Let's move on to our next question from Nicole. Nicole asks, how do you best eradicate Tree of Heaven? I heard cutting it down to the ground will anger it to become more aggressive. Yikes.
I'm sorry. That's spoken like a true gardener battling with an invasive plant. I'm guessing cut stump might cut it back and treat the stump. Jeannie or Liz? Sometimes when we cut plants back, what happens is there's all that stored energy in the roots and has no place to go. So I'm guessing that's what they're referring to, that it really shoots up. Even when you prune like a forsythia, when you take it to the ground, a 6-foot forsythia, I've seen it grow 12 feet after it was cut to the ground. So I'm guessing that's what they were referring to.
Yeah, you can do cut stump with triclopyr or glyphosate. Um, You can do mechanical, you can cut it, but it's going to take repeated cutting. So you have to cut every time it resprouts.
And you'll be really angry by then, so it will be easy to cut it, right?
Liz mentioned the glyphosate. Somebody in the chat had asked if the new formulation of glyphosate is or of Roundup is better than glyphosate. I didn't realize that it had a non-glyphosate version or a new version.
I think some of Roundup has some types of Roundup have other products in it for quick kill. Some have other products for more longevity. So you want to always read the label. I think, Roundup is the brand name, glyphosate is the active ingredient. So that's the reason, and they keep changing formulations. So I don't know if what you're referring to is a higher concentration or if it's one that has added ingredients to give you different kinds of control on different types of plants. So I will do a little bit of research on, I'll just kind of look through some Roundup, and Kelly's really good when she sends the thanks for attending out. If we come up with anything to add to it, she'll include that. So I'll just double check to see if there's something new that I've missed. And I don't know if Liz or Jeannie, you're aware of anything else.
You see a suggestion in the chat from Drew. Drew says, don't cut it down into girdle, tree of heaven.
And just keep in mind with girdling, unless you're doing a basal treatment, if you're girdling it, you may not kill the roots and it may resprout under where you girdle. So keep that in mind. If you opt to girdle it instead of cutting it down, it may not kill the whole plant. It may not kill the roots. So if you do girdle, kind of keep an eye on it and make sure that you're not getting resprouts, that you're done. It's a host for the lantern fly, which is an invasive insect, which does a lot of damage. So the other benefit, if you have tree of heaven and getting rid of it, is dealing with that invasive insect that can be pretty devastating.
Next question is from Jane. Jane says, my neighbor has a very old burning bush, about 30 years old. He keeps it trimmed, but is that an invasive bush?
One of the things I didn't mention, and then you guys jump in, is when you look at it in Wisconsin, under burning bush, there are some species that are not controlled. And the same, like I mentioned, the moneywort, the yellow leaf varieties weren't restricted or weren't prohibited or restricted. So, are you near a natural area? If he's trimming it, is he getting, are you seeing seeds forming? That would be something. Um, it's his plant. I don't know if he'd be willing to. There's so many better options than burning bush. Aronia, flowers, fall color comparable to burning bush, fruit the birds eventually eat in the winter. So much better ornamentally. But I don't know, Liz or Jeannie, anything to add?
I will say burning bush is restricted. So even if it's not one of the exempted cultivars, as long as he's had it for 30 years, he can continue to have it, unfortunately.
And we have a guest in with Liz, her cute little guy Dax, which I said he can't come on the camera. He's too cute. You won't pay attention anymore.
Let's head on to our next question here from Jane. Jane is asking about the Bradford pear tree. Are the blossoms and seeds invasive?
Bradford pear are, so is Calorie pear, that all those are invasive plants. And if you go, you'll see them fields, yes, in the birds eat the fruit and spread them, and yes, it's a problem. So one to get rid of. It's not even the best ornamental plant because it tends to break apart in storms, doesn't tend to be long-lived. So it's one that I know it's always hard to get rid of a mature plant, but it's one that, getting rid of it, you'll do good things for the environment, but also you can pick a better plant for your landscape too.
I
And I
think it
will,
was the calorie pear. My son's a truck driver, and he was driving down south in the spring, I guess, whenever they bloom.
Right,
And he's
spring.
like, "What tree stinks? It's blooming everywhere." And he's in a sealed up semi truck, and he could smell it, and it was the calorie pear.
Oh my.
um, I would say calorie pear is not currently regulated in Wisconsin, but it is being proposed for regulation. We're going through an update of our invasive species rule. So currently not regulated, but it is being proposed. And they're not they're not supposed to self-pollinate. So each cultivar shouldn't be able to pollinate with itself. However, different cultivars. So if you have two different cultivars in the same area, they can cross-pollinate and actually create seedlings. So that's why, despite being an infertile plant, it technically can still spread.
Yeah. So Elizabeth is wondering, where can I find information on the viability of invasive seeds?
I'm not sure the DNR website has that. I know it's in some publications. I don't know of any one-stop place. I just learned about buckthorn seeds just having about a 2-year viability last week. So that was news to me. And garlic mustard is pretty well advertised as having many, many years. I don't know if you're aware. Michigan State, while you two are thinking about Michigan State University, I was lucky enough to do a PBS program years ago, and they did a study on weed seeds, not just invasive, and they took weed seeds over 100 years ago and buried them in different parts of this garden, and they were going to dig them up every year to see what the germination was. Well, they were 100%. So then they went to every 5 years and then every 10 years. And so it's not surprising that these invasive plants that really spread on their own have such long viability in terms of seed life. I don't know if you two know of any resources.
No, but I wonder, I don't, maybe Liz will, but I also wonder if maybe Mark Run's lab might have, for some specific species, maybe there's not a one single source, but maybe he'll have some kind of references to
I
them.
haven't spent as much time on his website as I need to, obviously, and I don't know if on his fact sheets if he talks about the seed viability either. If anyone in the chat knows of some, let us know. But yeah, if I find anything, I'm making a list here of things I need to do a little hunting, and if I find something, we'll share it back to you.
And I'm not aware of anything either. We don't have anything on the DNR website for something
Okay.
like that, as far as I know.
Did you just mention a particular website? Because Elizabeth asked what was that website?
I mentioned the Mark Runs, which is there's a link on your handout to it's the UW. There's a link. I think I even just say Mark Runs, and it was in one of the earlier slides. I don't know if that was it.
Just put the link to the handout in the chat
Okay,
there.
thank you.
Alright. Our next question is from Beth. Beth is wondering, do you have good strategies for removal of creeping bellflower? I think, did we talked
Yeah,
about that, right? Okay,
yeah.
we
So
covered that.
hopefully, Beth, you were tuned into, digging or smothering. I don't know that. I think those would be, and digging, just keep in mind you've got to get all of the rhizome.
I think this comment is about one of our first questions. Priscilla says that suggests that they remove the female buckhorns to start.
Right.
I'm going
So
to
as
let that-
as
Mhm.
Jeannie was mentioning too, maybe if it's especially if it's on your neighbors, at least you're
Oh.
getting the females that are setting seed. So you're reducing, again, it's that, okay, let's try to contain the spread. We may not be able to eliminate them right away, but let's slow them down anyway. So thank you for bringing that back up, Priscilla.
Right, our next question is from Cassie. Cassie says, I often house sit for a property in an INRA, 5 acres, and have taken it upon myself to remove garlic mustard, buckthorn, and oriental bittersweet. I tend to walk the entire property and either pull or spray the invasives, and am planning on tackling the larger buckthorn with chainsaws as I am able over the years. I think there are about 6 largish buckhorn trees, and I got one down last year. I chopped all the branches with seeds off and bagged them after cutting it down and treating the stump. Does this seem like a decent tactic, as I am not there often, maybe a couple times a year?
I think we all wish you were house sitting for us. I don't know about you guys, but I'm like, can I invite you over? I'll feed you. I think you're doing something. I think you're pulling what you can. If you see something flowering, you got rid of the female buckthorn. Uh, to me, it sounds like a very good It sounds like you followed that strategy of IDing, researching and doing control and evaluating and adapting. I don't know, Jeannie or Liz, if you have anything to add. Wow, those people are lucky that you house sit.
Yeah, yeah, I can put up a tent. I'm not going anywhere, but
Yes, he's mentioning in the chat. I just don't work from the out or from outliers to core, but more the entire property.
Oh, you know what? If you can do that, that's great. I think a lot of it thank you. A lot of it depends on the infestation and, you know, if you feel like you can't it sounds like you've got a good handle on the whole property, but sometimes that core is pretty dense. And if you start there, you may never get to the rest of the property, but it sounds like you're walking that property and doing a good job. So thank you for making that effort. That's great.
Questions from Larry Sovlin, asking about Bishop's goutweed. What to do about that?
Yeah, Bishop Scoutweed was one of those we talked about mowing. You could mow several times. It does spread by underground rhizomes. Smothering will work, but it takes a couple tries. I think the DNR website does talk about using glyphosate Roundup, but if you've tried it, it's going to take several applications. I think too often we think once and done, and with these invasive plants, it's usually several times. So if it's a garden bed, I've talked to gardeners who have had much better luck smothering, but then they have to sacrifice anything else growing in that area. The same with mowing. If you've got good plants in there and you're mowing, you're probably going to kill those too. So those would be my two suggestions: is either mowing and or doing the smothering if you're not interested in using a chemical.
yeah, and she follow up said that it's just hasn't been working.
The
She
Roundup.
doesn't that the mowing and smothering, she's still not able to get it under control.
And with smothering too, you have to make sure there aren't any plants that aren't being covered and that you are securing that cover too, so no light's getting in. And it's not and a lot of people, some of the publications out there, not the DNR site, don't talk about leaving it on for a whole season. And I think with Bishop's goutweed, it's a 2-year process. And that may be where you have to try a couple strategies. Maybe you do mowing and glyphosate, get those cut ends open and see if that gives you any better control. I don't know if you have any other suggestions, Liz.
Those would have been my same suggestions. You
Okay.
can hand pull or dig up, but you have to try to get the rhizomes as much as possible, and that's one that's going to take repeated effort and might not be 100% successful.
Right.
So, yeah, mostly smothering. I've heard people can have luck with, but you need to keep it out all season.
Question from Cornelius. Cornelius is asking, does burning help control parsnip?
Okay, I'm looking at Jeannie and Liz on this one.
It resprouts pretty readily after burning. So if you want to use burning to help control parsnip, you're going to have to follow it up with some kind of herbicide treatment. If anything, sometimes the clearing of a burning can actually help it establish quicker once it starts to regrow.
Okay.
Jean is asking, or saying, oregano has gone crazy in our neighborhood, invading prairies and woodland edges. It is so aggressive. Any suggestions on control?
Wow, I know oregano is awful as an aggressive herb, but boy, we planted it at the State Fair Garden as an edible ground cover, and we're still trying to get rid of it 15 years later. I have not heard, not that I'm not doubting you, I just haven't heard of it in invasive woodlands and prairies. So I know it's not on any list. I don't know. You guys, to me, it'd be a prior Roundup kind of spot treat, would be my thoughts. I haven't heard any. Yeah.
No, I
I
haven't
haven't heard much either.
run into it. My thing I will never ever plant outside of a container is any mint. Well, of
Right.
course, our old friend Creeping Charlie, who someone asked, did we get to Creeping Charlie yet? That's a mint, mint's spread. And is
And
oregano in the mint family too?
yes, yeah. And it belongs in a pot surrounded on a patio with big patio with lots of concrete. I had it on my patio and it seeded in around like 10 feet away. So yeah. And you want to harvest anyway before the flowers form. Bees and pollinators love the flowers, but again, it's one that does spread. So um, yeah, creeping Charlie, it's if it's in your lawn, that's a lot easier to control. If you don't mind, all the University of Wisconsin found that all those broadleaf weed killers you tried that didn't work will work if you treat it when it's in full bloom, usually around in Wisconsin, southern Wisconsin, usually around the third week of May, or in fall after a hard frost. When you treat it in the fall, it dies and then it looks like it's going to come back, but then it dies. Keep in mind, however, there's lots of seeds in the ground for all those years before, so it takes a couple years. Once it's in the garden, that's where you're going to need to do the pulling and digging, but any little piece that hits the ground can root. And again, it might be a total vegetation killer to spot treat when it's in the garden because those broadleaf weed killers you do not want to use in a flower bed or a garden where you've got good plants growing because you'll kill those as well.
Next question is from Jane. Jane says, I am battling hairy bittercress weed, which I somehow brought home from a reputable garden center. I have pulled it year after year, but it's still spreading. Any suggestions?
I'm at a loss for this one.
Mm.
Do you two have any thoughts? I think pulling is your best bet. I'm not that familiar with managing that one.
Which plant was I was writing myself
Bitter.
a note to get broadleaf weed killer for my Creeping Charlie.
Well, before we go to the bitter crest, let me just
Oh,
add on
bittercress.
that creeping Charlie. I forgot to mention, avoid the dicamba and Banvel. There's an Ultra Max product that, yeah, it kills creeping Charlie anytime you spray, but it's hard on trees and shallow rooted trees and shrubs. And where does creeping Charlie usually get started? In the shade. So,
Mm.
yes, they're effective, but I really highly recommend avoiding broadleaf weed killers that contain dicamba or banvel because it's hard on our trees and shrubs. So thank you. You bought me time to take care of that, Jeannie, so thanks. Was that bitter cress? That
So we
was the
regulate narrow
oh,
leaf bittercress, but I'm not sure if that's the same
Uh,
species.
hairy bittercress weed.
oh, hairy bitter cress. Thank you. Okay, I'm making a note. Let me see if I can find something. Everybody will get the answer. But
Yeah,
Kelly's
I'm
very
not
good.
familiar with that one either.
Okay, so let me do some checking too.
And I'll link to the DNR's page on narrow leaf
Okay, thank you.
bittercress. Mhm.
Sometimes common names, same plant, different common names.
And then we've got a question from Jane. Jane says, you talked about cutting the blooms of Dame's Rocket and garlic mustard. Will the results be the same by pulling the plants out?
Better if you, well, especially Dame's Rocket, if you pull the plant out. So cutting back is one of the things that we do to prevent reseeding. Garlic mustard, Liz brought up a good point. When the soil's hot and dry, it's really hard to pull things out, but often in the spring, there's plenty of moisture. With garlic mustard, it's a biennial. So if you prevent it from reseeding, that really takes care of it. And it's a lot easier if you cut it, as we talked about with Dame's Rocket. Cutting it back is to just slow the spread. So if you can dig it out all parts, that's even better. So, and if you're willing to pull, that's great. So cutting, yeah, Jeannie looked
It's
like,
Yeah, it's pretty easy to once you recognize the leaves for the um Dame's Rocket, you can pull it the same it's up at the same time as the garlic mustard. So while the ground is still loose and damp enough for you to pull garlic mustard, you can pull the Dame's Rocket at the same time if if they're together, you can get two birds with one stone. I did that helping the Lake Winger group one year. We were working on an area by the Arboretum and over by Wingrove Boats. And yeah, we had little kids to adults. They were having so fun. This one little guy, he must have been 4 years old. He looks at me and he says, "This will be the passion for the rest of my life."
Oh,
we need to find him. I got some stuff he can pull.
It's been a while. He's big enough to probably pull out buckthorn
Buckthorn.
now.
And good idea. I'm sure I have some Dame's Rocket next to that garlic mustard. I haven't noticed it blooming, but I'm sure it's probably trying to creep in.
Jerry's been tossing good stuff into the chat. He looked up the range of glyphosate. There's one that has 0, and then it ranges from the rate around 18 to 38%. One Roundup had 0 glyphosate.
Oh, 0. So wonder what
Hmm.
the active ingredient is then, if there's
Yeah.
no glyphosate in it. When you hear the word preen, you think of a pre-emergent, and they came out with a glyphosate product, a broadleaf, and their pre-emergent under the brand name of Preen. And a lot of people were surprised. So thank you so much for mentioning that, because you've got to look at the label. No glyphosate in Roundup. That's pretty interesting.
Hmm. He also mentioned trying to treat Creeping Charlie 3 times in fall with a borax solution.
One of the problems with that was some research done out of Iowa State. So the problem with that is plants use boron in a very limited basis, in a small amount. And so, yes, Creeping Charlie is more susceptible to boron toxicity than the surrounding grass, but they were also finding some boron toxicity on desirable plants. And so, really, they've stepped away from recommending borax because it could cause some long term damage to your desirable plants, because there's not a lot of information on how much boron every individual plant needs, because it's a minor nutrient. But if we're continually adding more, we could potentially damage our good plants. So that is an old recommendation out of Iowa. I know some people who've had good results, but I'm very concerned about the long-term impact on our desirable plants. So, you know, I would say I would try to look for another option just to be on the long-term safer side. So thanks for bringing that up though, because I know it's out there.
We have a suggestion in the chat from Elizabeth who says, also just a reminder to pull non-native lupine. There's the cultivars that grow and cross-pollinate with native lupine that are toxic to the Carner's blue butterfly.
Thank you.
If anyone has any remaining questions, you can put them in the Q&A box. Otherwise, we are recording this, so we will send out the link to that recording in several days, along with the handout that Melinda used tonight, and then our follow-up research. I know we'll have some extra info to share as well.
Great. I was just kind of cruising through the chat as well there. You guys, thank you so much for adding. I really appreciate all the input from Liz and Jeannie and all of you who add your comments to the chat, because we're going to have to work on this together to really make a difference. There's a lot of invasive plants out there that need managing. So thank you guys for being willing to take time to help make a difference. So thanks to all of you who took time to join us tonight and are making a difference out there on your property and natural areas as well.
Thank you all so much. So check out more great webinars coming up this spring and summer and fall with Melinda, and we're teaming up with MMSD and We Energy. So there's going to be a slew of great workshops and we'll learn a ton of stuff this season. So keep an eye on the event calendar on mpl.org for links to those presentations. And again, this is being recorded, so we'll send out the recording and then the handout and then extra information that we discussed tonight. So thank you, Melinda and Jeannie and Liz. Thank you so much to everyone who shared your evening with us. It's been really, really great. So thank you, and we'll see you next time. Bye now.